Pro Football Playbook, presented by the Pigskin Podcast Network. Your source for team news, draft needs, player profiles and rankings, full Senior Bowl, Combine, and NFL draft coverage. News, analysis, discussion. It's in the playbook. Now, here is your host, sports journalist Bill Alvstad, and featured analyst Keith Myers. Hey guys, welcome into the Pro Football Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with Keith Myers. We're talking free agency, the first week of free agency. Keith, welcome in, man.
Yeah, it's been a crazy week. The first week of free agency is always crazy, but this year has not failed to live up to that standard.
Yeah, I thought we were going to avoid some quarterback drama just because the first thing that kind of came off the board was the whole Aaron Rodgers trade, or not trade, but going back to Green Bay and signing the contract. And then all of a sudden we had the Wilson epic trade to Denver. That just kind of tipped that whole market. So now Seattle's exposed on their quarterback needs. And Deshaun Watson became kind of a thing all week. He was kind of cleared of being criminally responsible for any of those things that are going on in his world. And all of a sudden teams were just going to completely discount all the civil stuff and 22, accusers. And he was going to be a legitimate option for teams now all of a sudden, where everyone's kind of clamoring. I don't think it's a matter of just discounting the civil stuff, because what happened was
they assembled a grand jury, and the standard for a grand jury is really low as far as what the prosecution has to give. And the prosecution is the only one who tells the story. There's no defense. It's just the prosecution telling the story that they want to tell, giving all the evidence that they want, even things that won't be admissible in court when it comes around to an actual trial. And with all of that going for them, the jury was like, yeah, you got nothing. And so legitimately there is no way to prosecute him. There's just no evidence. And that's what the grand jury said. And so that essentially clears him of criminal wrongdoing. Whether he did anything or not, there's no evidence, is really what it comes down to.
Yeah. And so what does the league do with something like that? Do you expect some sort of suspension?
At this point, he's going to be able to lean on that and say nothing happened. And then he's not hurt by the fact that, yes, there are 22 allegations, but all 22 women are represented by the same lawyer. And
that's kind of weird.
That's super sketch. And I think what's happened is, he's also interjected himself into the story way more than he should, which has not helped his case. And so therefore it has helped, Deshaun Jackson's. And so you end up with a situation where Jackson's going to be able to say,
Watson.
Why did I just say Jackson? Watson, can basically say, oh, this is just some ambulance chaser chasing money, and not anything that's real, whether that's true or not. And I think Watson's going to be able to avoid any major suspension or anything, and the criminal stuff that's disappeared. I'm not condoning anything that he did. No. I'm not saying that he did nothing. I am not saying any of that. I'm just saying that from an evidence standpoint, it's going to be really hard for the league to do anything against him.
Yeah, the harder part is going to be the team that selects him is going to have to explain to their fan base, including all the women out there, that they should disregard his past or whatever, or baggage, however you want to call it, to come in and be their quarterback and be the face of the franchise. So that's the hurdle, I think. But nonetheless, that hasn't dissuaded multiple teams this week from being in the game, in the conversation with him. Now he's got no trade clauses in his deal as well. So he's able to kind of hone in and select the team that he wants to go to. And Houston kind of approves the package return for his compensation. And then there we go. Words just come out before we push record tonight that apparently the Atlanta Falcons have won the Deshaun Watson sweepstakes, and he's going to be their quarterback in 2022. Matt Ryan is now looks like he's either going to be released or traded. So
I can't imagine him being traded. His contract, given his level of play last year, no one's gonna want that contract. And so I am expecting him to be released in the next couple of days. But basically, whenever that trade goes through, they're going to have to release Matt Ryan in order to get the cap space necessary to bring Watson onto the roster.
So what do you think of that move by Atlanta? That's a home run swing if I've ever seen one.
Well, they've got a guy who is at the tail end of his career and is clearly declining. And now they go get a guy that's 26, that's been an absolute like stellar player, except for, this hiccup of last year where he didn't play at all because of all of this legal stuff that appears to have cleared up. And so they just went and got young and got good at a key position.
For basically a wash on the cap charges, and just going to go forward. So in the wake of this, so now Matt Ryan is looks like he's going to be available to some team as either a placeholder or a primary guy for the next 2 or 3 years. Also, out of this whole mess is Baker Mayfield got his feelings hurt in Cleveland when Watson was an option for them. They brought him in, they tried to negotiate a deal, and they didn't want to do that. So now Baker Mayfield says, well, our relationship is now too far gone. I want to trade. Cleveland came and said, we're not going to honor your request, but who knows, right? So now teams are going to be calling Cleveland and seeing what it would take to peel him away. I'm thinking maybe a conditional 3rd round pick that elevates to a 2nd or something like that would, based on playing time and so forth for a team. Maybe Indianapolis. I know Indianapolis.
God, Indy needs a quarterback.
Would be looking at Matt Ryan hard as well as maybe a Garoppolo and Baker Mayfield. Seattle, seems like they need a placeholder this year.
Seattle has not done the we're going to go rebuild thing even after trading Russell Wilson. They're signing some big deals. They're bringing in some name guys. They look like they're building a roster.
Do you find that kind of odd? I thought their best path would be to kind of not the tank hold, whatever, but under 7 wins next year so they could combine their 1st round draft picks and maybe a 2nd to move up into any spot in the draft to get their guy. And it looks like they're comfortable building a roster and Drew Lock as their quarterback in camp with maybe drafting a guy or bringing in a placeholder guy like Matt Ryan or Baker Mayfield or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know if Drew Lock's really the guy. I did not. Pete Carroll had a press conference.
I don't think anybody does.
And he talked about Drew Lock, and he was like, well, if we can get him back to, how he played, a couple of years ago, then sure. But he was not sold. He said the right things, but what is he going to do? Throw his player he just traded?
He's not going to say anything but what he said. Yeah.
Yeah. And so but Seattle, they don't appear to be rolling over and tanking and getting ready for that, the draft class a year from now. They seem to be trying to build and win now. So Matt Ryan would be interesting. Baker Mayfield would be interesting. I don't think they could get in on the Jimmy Garoppolo stuff because why would San Francisco give a division rival their quarterback?
How about Kirk Cousins, something like that?
No, Kirk Cousins actually just signed a deal with the Vikings, so he is staying.
A 1-year deal, though.
Yeah, he signed a 1-year extension, but it's a lot of money. But he's staying there.
None of these guys we're talking about though are difference makers.
I mean, Matt
Ryan.
Not at this
stage. Not at this stage. I mean, you've seen his arm the last couple of years. It's deteriorated. He's not nearly got the velocity and the accuracy that he used to have, and he's also lost weapons too. So we just don't know. But yeah, I mean, if he was released and he went through waivers and you could sign him on a deal, what would be a deal that you would feel comfortable with on a Matt Ryan to be a placed bridge holder kind of quarterback, a 2-year, $24 million a year type of a deal? Or is it going to take more than that?
I would look at Phillip Rivers a year ago when he signed with Indy. It was like a 1-year, $22 million contract with Indy, and he came in and took him to the playoffs and looked, okay, but not great. Matt Ryan's going to be looking in that same area, probably 2 years instead of one, but it's going to be 22, 24 million a year to come in and guide a team. And honestly, Indy looks like a great place for him. All of the stuff that's happened in the last like few days that's created a larger quarterback market than anyone thought sure makes the Washington Commanders look terrible. I mean, honestly,
Carson Wentz we're talking about.
They couldn't get in on the Watson sweepstakes, given that the fact that their owner is not allowed near the team and his wife is running the team because of all of the allegations against him and that kind of stuff. So I don't think that would have ever happened. But you've now got Matt Ryan available. You've got Baker Mayfield available. You've got Jimmy Garoppolo available. And they still traded draft picks for Carson Wentz and that contract where they're paying him $25 million a year for the next 3 years. It's just that's not a good place to be. There's better options at cheaper prices available now, but
so let's go through. We've been talking about some quarterback contracts. Let's talk about individual player contracts that have kind of caught your attention in free agency. And let's start right at the top, the Von Miller deal. Everyone talks about this deal, but what does it really mean? 6 years, $120 million. What is it? Is it more like a 3-year, $55 million deal as far as guarantees and the back end not being guaranteed and so forth?
So the front end is guaranteed. He's going to be there for 3 years. After that, things get to a point where they can move where they need him to if it's not working.
Why do you think that they would structure this? We're talking about Buffalo, which I think is a great move for Buffalo. In fact, I think Buffalo is one of the teams that has done fairly well in free agency. Why did they structure this deal this way?
Well, I think they structured the deal that way because it allowed them to spread the most you can spread a contract or a signing bonus out is over 5 years. So that 6th year doesn't really help them, but what it does, it helps Von Miller's agent to, hey, look, I got Von Miller $120 million. Even if he only ever sees like $50 million of that money, nobody seems to remember that. But they do remember the $120 million price tag when from when it was signed. And so,
so is this a good deal for Buffalo? Is this a fair deal, or is this a deal where Von Miller's going to be 33 years old in a couple months?
That's the thing that gets me here is that Von Miller was absolutely unblockable, arguably the second best defensive player in the game 3 years ago. He's had a couple of injury years. Last year, he moved teams. He was effective for the Rams, but he was mostly effective for the Rams because no team could focus on him. Aaron Donald had to be the focus of your defense. And there were guys coming from both sides. It wasn't just him. And so he put up some decent numbers, but he wasn't the focus of opposing offenses anymore. It's almost like he'd lost a little bit and wasn't quite the player that he was. That doesn't mean he's bad. He's still a great player.
But here's the deal with like a Buffalo. It's like Buffalo can afford to make this deal. This is a deal, this is a win now deal. This is a team that's got all the other things handled, and they're going to go out and this is the piece or one of 2 or 3 pieces that they need to put them over the top that they feel. And so you're not going to see bottom dweller teams make this sort of deal, nor would Miller probably want to go to those teams. So this is kind of a perfect match for him and for the team. Let me see like 2 or 3 other contracts, Keith, that you thought were just crazy.
So the craziest contract to me is still the Christian Kirk contract, with him going for what it just feels like an insane amount of money to Jacksonville.
It's still only $37 million guaranteed, but overall it's 4 years, 72. I don't think he sees the back end of that, but
I agree. But it comes down to, for him, that you're looking at a guy that has talent. He's young. He's 26, And he was not going to Jacksonville on a market deal. No one is going to Jacksonville. That has been just pathetically bad over the years on a market deal. They have a ton of money to spend. And
they totally completely screwed the market up on a number of fronts in this.
And they don't care.
Period.
They don't care. But yeah, they have a ton of money to spend, and they have to overspend if they want people to come in. And so for them to, drastically overpay a guy like Christian Kirk, they don't care. He comes in, he helps them improve. It becomes a situation where it's an incremental improvement for them. 2 years from now, he's probably getting cut. I bet he spends 2 years on this roster and then gets moved.
Or strangely enough, the cap will go up so much
it won't matter.
He'll be a bargain.
Yeah.
Which is absurd.
Which is also a possibility.
It's possible. So a lot of other guys are getting paid. Everyone was kind of paying attention to Chandler Jones. I thought that was a fair deal with Vegas, but still $52 million over 3 years with $34 million guaranteed, $17.5 million APY. That's a big deal.
For one of the most productive pass rushers in the last decade. I mean,
he fell off a little bit. I mean, he started the year last year with 5 sacks.
I know.
And then that was it.
Yeah. And he did fall off last year and I get that, but he's still an incredibly productive pass rusher overall, and teams, you can never have enough good pass rushers. So I expected him to get a good deal, and he did. Is he slowing down? Maybe. I don't know if the Raiders get out of him what they think they're going to, but it seemed like a pretty fair deal to me given his track record.
So I wanted to talk to you about the Randy Gregory situation with Dallas.
That's
something
weird.
happened with Dallas. Dallas extended a contract. They accepted the terms of the deal.
Mm-hmm.
And then Dallas came in with some terms that made Randy Gregory and his agent balk at the deal. Within 24 hours, less than 24 hours, he had signed a new deal with the Denver Broncos, 5 years, $70 million. So that was a little weird to me.
It's very weird, but here's the thing. So Randy Gregory has been suspended a number of times. He has had some trouble. He's also, 2 years ago, like to the day, he entered rehab, got his life turned around. He's been on the straight and narrow and has been not just not getting caught, but has actually been walking the walk as far as all that stuff goes, and has totally turned his life around on top of being a great player. And so he got this contract thing that said that any suspension, any fine from the league on the personal conduct policy automatically voids all of the guarantees in his contract. And he was like, wait, what? So despite 2 years of things being solid for him, they're still saying one fine for on the personal conduct policy voids everything. And he was like, no, thank you. And he contacted Denver, and Denver was like, we'll give you the same numbers. And he signed that. But it was the same numbers without that clause. Now there's conflicting reports. The Cowboys say, oh, we have that. We put that in every contract, but we know that's not true because it's not in or Dak Prescott's deal. And it's not in a couple other players' deals. But it is in a bunch of players' deals. And Jerry Jones didn't even know that it was in the contract that they've been using the last couple of years. So it's just such a weird situation for for this team and for them. And honestly, great pickup by the Broncos, who are seriously in win now mode. I mean, they just got Wilson and they're loading up on their defense, and they've already got weapons, and it's a great move for them. The Broncos continue to build a roster that everyone should be excited about.
Yeah, there's a 3-way race right now in the AFC West. The NFC West last year was the best division in football. I think that's clearly shifted now.
Oh yeah,
to the AFC West.
AFC West is clearly the better division in my mind. And I mean, You move Russell Wilson out of one division and into another, and guess what? That makes a big difference. But on top of that, you said it was a three-way race. I mean, the Raiders made the playoffs, and they just signed Chandler Jones. Are we really going to write the Raiders off as not being in this race?
And they're settled in now, I think, with culture and coach, so that makes a big difference too.
They're not going to have the coach like stupidity they had to deal with last year, and they've got some better players. And honestly, that division, the Raiders might be the fourth best team in that division, and they could probably go and win 5 or 6 different divisions.
We were talking about last year that the NFC West could put forth 4 teams that would make the playoffs, and certain things just didn't happen and just didn't work out that way. But AFC West right now is looking like that could be the next division to have that opportunity for sure. I want to talk to you about a couple of players that I thought were just kind of standouts as far as the size of contract. The first one that comes to mind is DJ Reed, the cornerback from Seattle, moved on to the New York Jets. The Jets gave him a 3-year, $33 million deal, $11 million APY. That seems like a little bit much for a player that has basically 1 year under his belt as far as production.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy that played half a year in 2020 and 2/3 of a year in 2021. Looked great during both of them when he played, but that's it. That's his only production in the NFL. And
this is a practice squad. This is a practice squad level player prior to 2020, right?
Yeah, I mean,
he didn't really get a lot of opportunity in San Francisco, and then San Francisco let him go after an injury situation. They were hoping to get him back on the practice squad. Yeah, that's where he came from.
It wasn't that they were trying to get him. They were trying to move him to injured reserve. And when you transfer a guy onto injured reserve during the off season, they have to go through waivers, and Seattle picked them up off waivers and held him on the roster for 6 weeks, knowing that he would eventually be healthy. It was a gamble. It paid off for them for a couple of years, but for the Jets, honestly, this is very much a Christian Kirk type contract for them. That team is terrible. They need help, and they can't get players to come in and commit to being there. So they overpay. They have to, but they have the salary cap space to overpay a guy like that, and know that sure they're overpaying now, but they've got the money. And in a couple of years, the salary cap will have gone up a bunch. And if he continues to play like he has the last couple of years, $11 million for him is going to be a bargain. And if he doesn't continue to play like he has for the last couple of years, they cut him and move on and go back to having a ton of money that they can throw at other players and overpay for.
So I was thinking about winners and losers so far, and free agency hasn't been going on very long. There's still plenty of players out there. We can talk about a couple of players that are still available. But I thought Denver, with, if you add the Wilson thing in, I know it's a trade, but you're gaining a player, you're letting go other players that are less than, and added DJ Jones, Randy Gregory. They still have 8 draft picks, I think, which is an overlooked part of this whole situation. They're in really good position to really improve their team this year on all fronts. I mean, This is a team that's going to compete with both the Chargers and the Chiefs for that division title, and making some moves in the playoffs next year.
Well, and the team that I was going to bring up as one of the winners was the Chargers in that same division.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because this was a team that offensively could play with anyone last year, and their defense was just pathetically bad. But they went and made a trade for Khalil Mack, one of the more dominant pass rushers. Although last year was hurt, they were able to bring back Mike Williams and not lose him. But then they also added, cornerback J.C. Johnson, Jackson, and that
was a big contract too. That was a $16.5 million a year contract. That was big.
And so they were able to get guys in there. They've improved the quality of that defensive roster greatly, without losing a lot offensively to do so. They're going to be, at least on paper, they look like they're going to be a very good team.
And they're under the the radar type move is Sebastian Joseph, their defensive tackle that they signed. I really like him as a run stuffer. That's a good good move for them.
This was a team that honestly could not stop the run at all, and looked just bad trying to do it.
That's exactly right.
I mean, they were legitimately one of the worst run defenses I've seen in a long time, and they just got much better between Mac and Joseph. Like they really added. So I think
they lost Nuwasu to Seattle in free agency, but they gained Mac. I mean that's a great move for them.
Yep. I mean, and if you combine, it's a lot of money that they spent for that upgrade, but it was an upgrade.
I think, the biggest losers for me so far, if you want to count the Jaguars just for overspending and having that come back to bite them at some point, that's a possibility for this list. But I thought the Colts, which haven't really done anything yet, and they've got a lot of cap space, which is confounding to me. On a team that's ready to win now, you'd think that they would have improved a couple of different spots and solidified those things. And then Dallas with the Randy Gregory thing, I just thought was just kind of weired and not a good look for them.
Such a weird deal. No, yeah. I mean, it's not something that they also traded away Amari Cooper, which maybe that's something we should talk about, because they traded Amari Cooper to the Browns for a 5th-round pick, and everyone was looking at that, his contract at $20 million a year, and you're like, that's a lot for a guy. He missed some time last year and all of that. And then you compare that to the Christian Kirk deal, who's only 2 years younger, but does not have the track record of being a legit number one player like Amari Cooper did. That's just a weird, a weird situation. Like, they traded away a guy whose contract does not look as bad as it once did. So I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on there. I really don't. It's going to be interesting, like how they do in the draft and so forth, and what their roster finally looks like in the regular season next year. If they're really sitting there where they need to compete, I don't know. So let's talk about some players that are still out there. The running back market has not really developed yet.
It never does.
There's a couple players. Excuse me. Excuse me. A couple
Melvin
players.
Gordon.
Yeah, a couple players that have signed, but there's guys out there. The Melvin Gordon, the Rashad Penny,
Sony Michel,
Cordero Patterson, Leonard Fournette, Sony Michel. Those are guys that are going to help teams. And so if you need a running back at this point, you're looking in pretty good shape as far as not having to overspend if you're going to get a free agent guy to come in and solidify your room before the draft. You should be able to get a guy for, $3 million, $4 million on 1 or 2 year deals.
Well, and then look at the you look at the market for wide receivers, and you see Jarvis Landry is still out there, Will Fuller, so the Juju Smith-Schuster is out there, T.Y. Hilton. There's some
Julio Jones was released by Tennessee, so he's now available.
Yeah, God, talk about like that trade not working out for them.
That's true.
So you've got Sammy Watkins is out there, although he always has a hard time staying healthy. But there's names to be had at wide receiver that those are guys that normally you'd think of as guys that are going to get contracts, but they just haven't yet. And the same would be true for the tight ends. There's a whole group of tight ends. Guys like Jimmy Graham and Rob Gronkowski, if they both want to come back, although they're older, but Gerald Everett, Kyle Rudolph, Eric Ebram, who are
Austin Hooper.
Yeah. Who are guys that are out there. So it is interesting that there is some talent sitting out there.
I was looking at this list, and I remember looking at this list about this time last year and thinking how diminished the overall players left in free agency was. That it wasn't really a deep free agency class, and you could just kind of go through and you were just like, there's actually some deep availability here that I would imagine by the end of the weekend, a lot of these guys are going to start to get value deals for teams, and teams are going to feel pretty good about what they ended up with, as far as at least having, good solid rotation guys added to your roster before the draft. I mean, most teams want to solve most position groups prior to the draft, so they don't have to reach at the draft and kind of let the draft come to them. And I think this year, a lot of teams are going to be able to do that. It'll be an interesting draft too, because the draft is got some players at the top, but then rounds 2 through 4 are pretty solid as far as depth in the draft. You're going to get some good players there, so it's going to be fun. I mean, this
is a really deep wide receiver class, which I think is part of the reason why there's a bunch of wide receivers still out there, is because teams aren't willing to go pay a ton of money for, middle of the road guys when they're like, wait, why are we paying this person this much when there's all these guys in the draft that could be significantly better, younger, and cheaper?
Yeah, interesting. Anybody else? How about everyone wants to talk about Bobby Wagner, and Bobby Wagner's still sitting there. He's only 31 years old, one of the best linebackers to ever play the game. He's a middle linebacker. He can help a team this year. What kind of contract do you think Bobby Wagner's? I heard a report, by a credible source, a 3 days ago, that there were at least a dozen teams lined up waiting to talk to Bobby Wagner and his agent. He's his own agent about a contract, and he's still kind of sitting there. And I haven't heard about any visits or anything.
Yeah, I mean, that part's interesting. So we are talking about a first ballot Hall of Famer. He's only 31, but he's old for 31. You watch him play, and he's got a knee injury that he goes and gets I think it's a platelet-rich plasma injection into his knee every year, and during training camp, and he has to do that to keep going. And he's lost, a step and some of that, but he's also incredibly productive, and he's been like in the top 3 in tackles every year of his career but one. And you bring him in, and he's a leader. He's a team captain, a leader, a guy that you can absolutely count on. And so there's a lot there. There's also some concern about, age, even though he's only 31, but just because of where his body is at. Yeah, he's been in the top 3 in tackles every year of his career but one.
At what point does Bobby Wagner start to worry about the market dollar availability drying up? Where he's going to look at it and go, I was hoping to get like a $12 million deal, and for over 3 years, $12 million per year, and now he may be taking a 1-year, $6 million deal just to play in the NFL in 2022.
Well, his old running mate did the same thing, because a year ago it was KJ Wright. The Seahawks have always run with, essentially 2 tight ends, and either played a lot of nickel, or they've, had a rotation of guys next to him. But it was those 2 guys, and KJ Wright hit the open market and found nothing out there for him. And he eventually signed right during training camp, like early on, with Vegas, and they didn't pay him that much. And, now you got
Bobby now he's Wagner. Still out there too.
Yeah, he signed a 1-year deal just to get out there and play, and he was an instrumental, leader in terms of keeping that ship afloat with the whole Gruden fiasco and everything else that team had to deal with. And yet he's still sitting out there too. So I think what you're going to see is that the market for linebackers is not super lucrative unless you're a pass rusher.
Well, I was going to ask you. A curious move that came up too. Zadarius Smith, backed out of his Ravens deal that he signed or agreed to sign prior to the to the opening of free agency officially on Wednesday. Backed out of that deal. He's 29 years old, outside linebacker, rushes the passer quite well. Yes, Zadarius Smith is an interesting name because there's certain 3-4 defenses I think that would benefit for to have him on the roster.
Yeah, and I think one of the teams that would benefit greatly by having him on the roster is the Packers, where he came from. And my guess, he was cut by them as a salary cap move, which they had to do in order to fit Aaron Rodgers' new contract under, get him under the cap. And so, but I do like wonder if they're like trying to get him to come back on a lesser deal and basically roll it back and try and get that team, into a Super Bowl, because they were real close last year as far as like look how well they played all year, and MVP at quarterback and all of that. And they can't afford to take a big step back. And so if they can get their guys to re-sign, that would be huge for them.
Wow. Is there anybody else you want to talk about? Is there any surprising guy that you're looking at thinking that they should have been long gone by now?
No, not really. As far as that, the guy that surprised me, Miles Jack, linebacker, from Jacksonville, went to the Steelers, signed, at $8 million AYP. I have a hard time like understanding how he signed for so little. 27-year-old, absolutely like just productive guy with a ton of speed, great tackler, good in coverage. And you look at that and I just like,
well, and look at the guaranteed money too. It's only $6.5 million.
Yeah. I mean, that seems like a tiny contract. I just wonder, like,
that's essentially a 1-year deal.
Did he get some bad advice from his agent, or maybe that's what the market is for linebackers right now, and that's why Bobby Wagner is still sitting out there, is because he's expecting, he made $17 million last year, and he might be expecting 12. But if a guy like Miles Jack is getting 8,
right.
Bobby Wagner, his numbers, people are like, well, why would we sign that when you got other guys out there that can come in and okay, they're not they don't have the name value and they don't have the leadership stuff, but the on-field production might be there at a fraction of the price.
Yeah. Well, like Jordan Hicks, for example, moved on from Arizona, went to Minnesota on a $10 million deal, $5 million guaranteed over 2 years. I mean, you're going to get, it's not Bobby Wagner, but you're going to get production at a spot that might not be as important to you in your scheme at middle linebacker anymore. So Bobby's got a few select teams, I think, that could use him, and those teams might not be interested. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. I'm just curious.
Yeah, he is definitely an interesting case. I hope he doesn't ruin his own market by just waiting for too long, because there's a lot of cap room that has disappeared in the last couple of days. Exactly.
What do you think about Fletcher Cox being released by the Eagles? Age 31, defensive tackle. Is he done? I mean, or was his cap number just too much?
I think his cap number was too much. Although he is an older guy, and I know you're like, he's only 31. I'm like, I see that. I see that on the the spreadsheet, but I thought he was significantly older.
I did too.
It feels like he's been around for.
I thought he was like 34. Honest. Okay.
Yeah.
I think we can wrap this one up. Let's come back next week and we'll update it some more, and we'll do some fun stuff. Maybe we'll do a mock draft. To kind of change it up a little bit. We'll get back to talking about prospects in the draft. There's just so many prospects in the draft to talk about. I just hate to skip a little bit of time doing that because it's so much fun.
And one of the things that once we have, now that free agency is reached that point, because you've seen this after about 2 weeks, the free agency market tends to really slow down. Yeah. And at that point, we can start looking at team needs for individual teams and be like, okay, what do we expect them to do in the draft?
All right. Follow Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. I'm at Alvstad NFL. The show's at PF_playbook on Twitter. You can find us on your favorite podcast platforms and YouTube. And here's the YouTube scroll. There you go. Find us on YouTube and subscribe. Do what it says. Come on. Help us out.
Yep.
All right.
Help us out, everyone. If you like this video, please subscribe.
There you go. All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Pro Football Playbook Podcast. Follow Keith at Myers NFL. Bill is at Alvstad NFL. The show is at PF_Playbook. Listen and subscribe on your favorite podcast app or YouTube. and at our website, profootballplaybook.co.